Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. If you're listening to this episode, you've come across what I call a special treat. These are two past guests I've been on very frequently, and you might have seen them recently, kind of giving you a brief breakdown and a conversation about something we talked about. Can't really remember what. Maybe too many cups of coffee, I don't know. But I'm here with Tim Smith and Craig Ciccone. It's a pleasure to have you both on here. Tim, I'm going to have you introduce yourself real quickly, and then Craig, you can, and then we'll get into what I think is probably going to be the meat and potatoes of this topic, since we just got into a heated discussion about it for about 20 minutes before.
Yeah, Robbie. My name is Tim Smith, and I wrote the book Hidden in Plain Sight, which was an analysis of the 52 witnesses who appeared before the House Select Committee on Assassinations in 1978.
All right. My name is Craig Ciccone. I'm an independent historian from Detroit. My contribution to the John F. Kennedy assassination is that I created and edited, compiled a database of witnesses that I put into a book called The Master List of Eyewitnesses, along with a 24 by 36 poster or map of Dealey Plaza, plotting all of those witnesses where they were.
Man, we got 2 hours to fill. You guys couldn't extend that out a little bit longer? I mean, come on, don't you got a little bit more fluff for the credentials? Come on, you see those generals with the giant bars covering so they can't even fold their face down?
I was born in San Rafael, California.
Take them back. All right. No, we wanted to discuss some things. It's a good topic, kind of starting off. All of us here have talked about the JFK assassination. Some of us here have written about the JFK assassination. A lot of us have talked about the RFK assassination, and some of us are doing work. Both you guys are on the Witness Project for the RFK assassination, what's going on in the pantry. Now, through our investigative, or through your guys' investigative lenses of looking and talking to researchers and analyzing information and compiling all this, whether it's the JFK assassination or the RFK assassination, you come across a whole host of information. I can give you my experience of when I've talked to Dennis DeVerne from Natalie Wood's drowning, and what the boat captain was like when I phone called with him, and him talking about being threatened by Robert Wagner. That after, when they got back, he had to live in Robert Wagner's guest house, and a certain story that was pushed, and him having to avoid the press if he was going to be choosing to live there. And as a 20-year-old kid, that's very influential in your decision making when you're basically broke and homeless. So again, through these conversations and these things that witnesses say, they also can say other things. And I think we've all kind of talked about briefly before we started recording. And I think it's a good subject, which is, again, people always say you can't trust witness testimony. And I think you have to trust it when necessarily the legal evidence or the agencies investigating certain things tend to avoid certain areas because it's not the answer or outcome they want. For instance, the JFK assassination, certain questioning being asked, and I'll throw this up to either of you guys. How do we, I guess, stop the blemishing or the altering or the movement of a certain thing to fit someone's narrative if they're going to publicize information that can be taken as historical context? I think that resonates with both of you, knowing how many things you might have learned or heard or saw or read in a book. And a lot of people can run around like it is facts. And it is very difficult to use that as evidence when the person already has their own perspective that they're giving you, but telling you this is the truth.
Well, I learned that lesson very early, and I'm a poster child for that very thing. My project for the witnesses for the JFK assassination started in 1991 because I was doing presentations or lectures at that time. I didn't have any large visual for Dealey Plaza to let people visualize where it was in Dallas, and where the motorcade was and where people were. So I had an architect friend of mine just do this huge 6 foot by 8 foot. I had to cut it into three pieces. It was a triptych at that point, and mounted on a foam core, and so that was really nice for people to be able to visualize what I was talking about, where Abraham Zapruder was filming from, and where the first shot happened and the last shot happened, so forth and so on. So I said, well, I've done it this far, so let's start looking at the witnesses and start plotting people on the map, not just the cars and the trees and the buildings. So it just blossomed into that, but I did it very quickly. I unfortunately, and for anybody who's bought my book, I do a complete mea culpa in the beginning of it, and I explained what had happened. That is, to borrow Mark Lane's phrase, I rushed to judgment. I let other people's research cloud my own. I took their word as fact, and I would incorporate that into my list. So go forward about 6 years, I wanted to revise the map a little bit, and to my horror, I realized just on a very superficial review of my own work, most of it was wrong. So I decided, okay, I'm going to stop publishing this. I'm going to start from scratch, and I'm going to get the actual witnesses' statements. So I'm going to find as many people who were interviewed by the FBI, the Secret Service, the Dallas Sheriff's Office, the Dallas Police Department, so forth and so on. And I am going to read their testimony and only use their words. I'm not going to put words in their mouth. So, for instance, if the Dallas police was interviewing a witness and that witness was vague in what their recollections were, especially their location, they would actually say things like, I was between 200 and 175 feet from the triple underpass. Okay, well, the interviewer knows that that's vague, that people who are reading this won't know what the triple underpass is, or, to be able to estimate that range, right? If people said, well, the first shot sounded like it was behind me, and depending on where they were standing, I would then say that they said shots came from the Texas School Book Depository, but there were 3 other buildings behind them, right? So I was putting words in their mouth, or like I said, I was taking other people's research, and instead of making sure that they were accurate in their recollection of what this witness said, I just took it as fact and put it into my stuff. A lot of it was wrong. So I just completely revamped the thing. It took me 15 years to completely overhaul this book and the map that went with it. And I'm fiercely proud of it because I did the work I should have done back then. Um, so that's a very important lesson about making sure that whoever you're sourcing is accurate, which is why as historians, we have to be vigilant and detailed in our sourcing. So in my book, every single source is cited so that you can find it yourself. You can go to the original source, you can read it for yourself. Because I'm just doing excerpts. I'm not publishing every statement from every witness. You know, I'm just doing highlights. But even saying that I'm highlighting their testimony or their statements shows a bias. I can't explain the bias. I don't know why I chose this particular quote, but not this quote. So, but that's on me. That's human nature. But what I'm saying is, even though I'm being selective in what I recall of a certain witness, I still give you every single statement that they ever made and where to find it so that you can look for it yourself and take the whole and put it into context.
Craig, I was it difficult on the map? And I think this would be less difficult in the pantry because it's not nearly as big as Daily Plaza. But as you know, in Daily Plaza, people moved. They were peripatetic. They're walking all over the place. So,
Exactly. And I explained it in my editorial method that the location that you see on the map was at the sound of the first shot.
Good.
So that's just the base, because I know a lot of people moved around, especially photographers who started filming when the car was close to them at Main and Commerce, and then walked across the North Lawn to get to Elm Street. So but then I will in like I have notes under many of the witnesses. I'll point that out. There are different locations at different points. And what was incredibly helpful was Richard Trask's pictures of the pain, where that is a must-have for any JFK researcher. It doesn't matter what his analysis of the photographs are. In many cases, he contacted the original photographer or their next of kin if they had died, and was able to obtain the negatives or first generation prints, and was able to put them in his book. So it was incredibly helpful for him to have done that, at least for the photographers. But there were lots of other witnesses who scattered, and so I make that clear in my book that yes, these people moved, but where they are on the map is at the sound of the first shot.
Did you contact Marilyn Sitzman?
What's that?
you contact Marilyn Sitzman or ever
I
get hold
didn't.
of her?
I never contacted her, but I did meet her at one of the Ask conferences, the Assassination Symposium on Kennedy down in Dallas.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so I was able to talk to her. So a lot of these witnesses,
Well, what did she tell you?
um, well, we never really sat down and like I had an interview with her. It was more like a conversation, kind of like with. I found myself in the lobby of the hotel speaking to Marina Oswald.
Right.
So it's not like I'm prepared for a whole list of questions.
What? I
It
would have
was
been fucking right there in a second. It's like you're
well,
did you have a dumb weather chat with somebody? Because if you asked, hey, crazy weather, or I would have. That's not the first question. I'd be like, hey, real quick.
no, no. I was actually more prepared with Paul O'Connor, who was one of the technicians at Bethesda Naval Hospital, and
Ah,
he came prepared. He came with a whole set of the Fox autopsy photographs, which of course
He's been asked the question multiple times. He has it all printed out in his wallet, ready to fold on
he
down.
does. He does. He was actually because he had also hand drawn what the autopsy room looked like at the time. So he was giving those maps away, or those drawings away. So at least we'd have because Bethesda was overhauled, and so the autopsy room where the examination took place isn't there anymore. Tim, what you got?
yeah. Interesting you mentioned Paul O'Connor. I didn't have Paul O'Connor do this. A friend of mine did. He asked Paul O'Connor, since Paul O'Connor apparently took the brain out of Kennedy's head, right?
That was his job, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then my friend asked him as he took the styrofoam head in, he asked Paul O'Connor to draw what the wounds were. He said, no one was closer than you if you took his brain out of his skull. So please show me where the wounds were. And this is what he showed. That's what he drew. He said that's where the wound was right there. Then he autographed it and whatever.
Did
You
you
have a
bring
question,
that?
sir?
Wait, did you bring that with you to the thing and he drew that on that?
I did. A friend of mine had him
Oh,
do it. A friend of mine,
I
he gave it
was
to
like,
me.
God, what are you, Carrot Top? Just carrying a trunk around of a bunch of random stuff in case the
Oh
occasion
yes.
comes
Oh yes.
out. Oh my God.
We
Well, no,
researchers are very weird.
you brought up a really good person to actually start off with as a first witness that we can actually look at. And a lot of things we can get into on what I mentioned in the beginning. Marilyn Zitzman. Obviously, in the beginning, her statements were a little bit different than the oral history interview I got with her at the JFK History Project, whatever it is, on the Texas University site. I'll link that below. But she stated that out of all the evidence that she had seen and all the things that have come out, that she finds that Lee Harvey Oswald being the lone nut is the hardest to believe. And again, what do we do when we have a person that changes their statements or changes what they saw or what they believed in initially? You want to trust the initial ones. I know that. But again, even if it swings to your side of the fence, what do you do? Again, Posner has said some stuff that has changed from his initial perspective on things. I think Tim has mentioned a couple times of certain interviews with how I did with Posner, and a certain statement he might have said is not what a lot of people were really expecting. And I get people in the comments all the time kind of defending Posner, like saying something like, this means nothing. And it's maybe for some it means a lot and for others it doesn't. But I think it's really the question here. And again, as a person, you're evolving constantly. So if your information or perspective isn't changing, then you're not really growing, correct? So
I would say two things real quick, Robbie. One, when it comes to Marilyn Sitzman, Zapruder's granddaughter, who wrote the book 26 Seconds, she said that after having conversations with Marilyn Sitzman, apparently, I guess that's what it was based on. She said that Marilyn Sitzman, the only reason she was there that day is she had gone to the bank to open up some type of savings account, and the bank was closed. So then that's the only reason she went over there and trotted and helped out Abraham Zapruder, but that she was not a fan of John Kennedy at all. In fact, she was very anti-Kennedy. So, I guess you got to weigh everything. As far as Posner is concerned, here's my guess, and I can't prove what I'm about to say, so I say it with some hesitation, but I think a lot of people like Posner, who at one time probably did look into the case and spent a lot of time looking. I'm not sure they've kept up with the case, because if he kept up with the case, he would know certain things about the acoustics. He would know certain things about neutron activation analysis. He would know all kinds of things. And he doesn't seem to be up to date on a lot of the data. So that always makes me, and I've heard Posner and other people say, yeah, I read, I don't know how many thousand pages. Every time I hear that, I go, yeah, okay. Why don't I believe that? Because I just don't. I just think it's easy to throw that out there. Well, I read, like you said, Robbie, the other day, I read the Warren Commission 17 times. Okay, whatever. I mean, what to say to that?
Well,
Well,
you enter an endless argument when you get into the point of like somebody changing their perspective because then it fits your narrative. For instance, let's take Paul Landis coming out saying he found the magic bullet or placed the magic bullet on that stretcher because he found it in between the seats. That's gone against everything that he has stated the whole many years prior. But his book is coming out, and now he's putting this in his book, and this kind of book is his perspective of things, which is not necessarily saying anything about like conspiracy or lone nut, but it's more focused on the fact of like certain details that went on that day. And then we could take Clint Hill jumping on the back of the thing. His new book comes out and he talks about never seeing the hole in the back of Kennedy's head out of all the years he's gone to all these conferences and said all those
Right,
things.
right.
Okay, so is that for vanity's sake? But then you get someone, I don't know, that makes a certain statement like Blakey talking about that he felt information was withheld from him from the CIA or other investigative agencies that when his HSCA was conducting their investigation. That's two different types of revealing and switching perspectives. That's one for vanity's sake and one for I didn't know the information was happening until it was revealed later in time. So again, I think we have to funnel our witnesses' statements and changing perspectives through that lens.
But you also have to realize or remember what are we asking of the witnesses? So if Clint Hill, and I give Clint Hill a pass just for everything he went through, I give him a complete pass because really very few things that he had to offer were fundamental to the case or really helped establish something that the evidence couldn't or the destruction of evidence couldn't. But somebody like Paul Landis, not only does that go against what he had said before, it also goes against everybody else's testimony, like Daryl Tomlinson, like, now I can't recall the gentleman's name, the administrator at the hospital. So finding the magic bullet, that's fairly easy to establish without Paul's jumping in and saying, "Oh, I found the magic bullet," in the limousine. If you did find a bullet, that's interesting because that means there could be another bullet that you found, hence a fifth bullet, and but even Marilyn Sitzman, her belief that Oswald, as the lone assassin, is the hardest theory to believe. Are we relying on Marilyn Sitzman now for the overall impression of whether this could have been a conspiracy or not? No. Look to her for the backstory of Abraham Zapruder, what they did, where they went, her discussions with Abraham Zapruder after this horrific event. So we have to make sure that we don't ask too much of a witness, them either giving opinions about something that they aren't a witness to, like they're just opinions, and their opinions can change daily, to more substantial pieces of evidence that were really crucial in their statements or their testimony. And funny that you should mention somebody like Posner, Tim, and talking about him not really keeping up with the case. Absolutely. Name 5 JFK researchers who have written follow-up more than 1 volume.
Yeah, good point.
I've fucking heard way too many times people talking about I've read the Warren Commission volume.
And that's essential. That's essential for anybody.
Recite it back to me backwards. I'm just like, I don't understand.
But Penn Jones Jr., which was all self-published, Harold Weisberg, which was all self-published, Mark Lane, which just got increasingly weird as the years went on. That's about it. I mean, you can talk about Jim Mars and you can talk about even Robert Groden, but those weren't really substantive books. But with somebody like Posner, absolutely he should have, because I even pointed out in my book, at the end of my book, in the epilogue, I talk about some of the deficiencies still left in the research having to do with witnesses. So I basically gave the reader an assignment. Here are things that we still need to know. Go find out and let me know. Because I've always thought of my work as a collective, not just mine, but I encourage people to read my stuff and to give me suggestions or feedback, or if they know something about witnesses, so that I can incorporate it in the book. And of course, I'll give them full credit. Credit has nothing to do with it. I'm just trying to establish as thorough of a database as possible. I can only do that with other people's help because they're doing research that I don't know about. But Posner is one. Number 4, identify and interview, if possible, the 5 additional U.S. postal employees, including the 3 who were allegedly watching the motorcade through binoculars from the Terminal Annex building. John Crossan, Bernie Schramm, and Tom Seaver, reportedly discovered and briefly alluded to by Gerald Posner. So if nothing else, Posner, follow up with these guys. You name them, but you don't say substantially that you interviewed them and what was the basis of or the outcome of that interview. So I put a call out, and this was, well, what I reissued this in 2010. So
Been a while.
it's been a while. So it's, yeah, follow up things like this, especially with the eyewitnesses. Yeah.
Am I mistaken? Didn't Paul Landis say the bullet was on the top of the back seat
Yeah.
and it didn't fall off? And that high speed,
It was
You know-
like the leather seat. It was like in the thingy at the top of the crevice or whatever it was. But again, they picked up bullet fragments all out of that limousine, and a lot of that
Paul
was
Landis is not going to get a book published unless he has something outrageous like that. It's the same thing with Wesley Frazier. We've all heard him talk, and he seems like a nice guy. But then the book comes out, and guess what? New revelation. He bumped into a guy who had a rifle. It's like, and because if you don't have that, why would they publish his book? You can go on YouTube and hear the same thing easily. So it's almost like you have to have a catch.
That is why we have over 2,500 books on the Kennedy assassination, because in order to be published, you have to have something that's sensational, right? Which is why we had somebody like Bonar Menninger claim that a Secret Service agent with an AK,
Is his name Boner or Bonner?
Bonner. Or even Jim Moore, who claimed that Oswald's guilt was firmly established by the fact that he got a Dr. Pepper out of the break room after the assassination, and not a Coke. He habitually drank Coke. So there's only one reason for him to have failed to choose the soft drink of his choice, and that's guilt. So, I mean, yeah. So as far as Frazier, who was an incredibly important witness, we have more than enough statements from him, interviews from him, certainly testimony from him, that we don't need a 50-year, retrospect where now he's remembering new details. That's suspect.
Or witnesses that simply are completely nonsense, like Beverly Oliver.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
why
We
that
can't nail down.
nonsense?
We
I don't
can't
know
nail
why that was ever put up with.
Yep.
Just
Agreed.
complete nonsense.
And yet she still continues to be part of documentaries and
Well,
the conferences that we have every year. Yeah, absolutely.
You find that the people that probably know the most or have the most information on the event typically trying to keep prolonging their fame or minute in the
Without a
spotlight.
doubt.
Again,
That's a motivation that has to be kept in mind.
that's with Oswald's boarding house and where he was staying at, the room he was renting, the people that would have tours that would go in there and show you. And I'm sure they still do it now in Dallas, where the building and everything gets glorified and put into this famous aspect of trying to prolong this minute in the spotlight. Again,
that house, the rooming house, I has like 20 rooms in it that were rented out. I mean, had no idea how many people live there. Who knows?
Well, it was Oswald, the second one, Oswaldovich,
Right.
from his time in the military.
The Oswald from Mexico City. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If I were, some witnesses come across obviously better than other witnesses. I wish I would have been able in my lifetime to talk to Skinny Holland. He just seems legit from the word go, never deviated, did what he probably should do. Once it happened, he went right to the back of the picket fence. He was just all over it. And he seems to be a legit guy with a real story to tell. And we all know the story, and I think it's a great one. I think it adds to what probably happened that day. But they're not all Skinny Hollands. We all know that.
No, without a doubt. I think he's an unscrappable witness, or was, which is why I'm so thankful to Mark Lane that he did what nobody else did, and he interviewed these people on tape, on video, and made a documentary of it, Rush Judgment, that accompanied his book. But absolutely, to listen to him, and good old Southern boy, old timer, who yeah.
I mean, I think it's a lot, even with columnists who interview certain witnesses from the RFK assassination and certain things like that. They get a little bit of information. Maybe it's not all what they were hoping for. Maybe the witness saw less of what they necessarily wanted to get to write a column. And they're going, how can I beef this up? How can I make this longer? Like I had mentioned in the beginning about your guys' intros. I mean, I think we're all at fault for doing this at certain times. And I would kind of pull this over to like the JFK oral histories, for instance, of all the people that he interviewed. The guy interviewed a person who dropped off books at the Texas School Book Depository building like an hour before the shots rang off. He had nothing to say. the thing was 25 minutes, and that was them trying their hardest to get things out of there.
Well, I've got to say, and I don't know if I've relayed this in any of our podcasts, Robbie, but for as absolutely crucial as the Oral History Project is at the Sixth Floor Museum in Dallas, Steve Fagan dropped the ball, and anybody who was interviewing these witnesses really dropped the ball. And quite frankly, they have no excuse, because since 2010, they had a copy of this book. So if they had somebody that they either contacted or contacted them, and they went to my book and said, "Oh yeah, Carol Hughes, you were," because in my book, I list their occupation, where they were, and who they were with, and then of course their impressions of the shots or the sounds. Um, then they would know exactly where they worked, right? Who they were with, and they would know all of the statements or testimony that they had given over the years. Then they could go back, get those, so that when they sat down with this witness, they could say, "It looks like you have an FBI document that's signed by you. Is this your signature? Is this what you said? You said something very interesting in your testimony. I'd like to go back over that." And even people who were misplaced on my map because their initial statement was very vague, and the FBI or whatever investigative body didn't want to clear that up. Where exactly were you? But on the filmed interviews, they're in a conference room that overlooks Dealey Plaza, and they simply point out the window. The camera doesn't follow their finger, so you don't know where they're pointing to. All they had to do was either go outside and say, "This is where you were standing," or "Here's a photograph. Can you find yourself in this photograph? What were you wearing? Do you remember?" So just things like that were lost. I've had so many of those witnesses that had never come forward before, and I don't fault them for that. And that's not an automatic, "Oh, get the hell out of here." 45 years later, you're coming forward. There are lots of reasons why they wouldn't or didn't want to. But for those who did, they told their narrative. They told their story. My mom pulled us out of school because this was a once in a lifetime thing. So we went down with 6 other people. And instead of saying, "Well, who were they? What were their names? Maybe we can interview them. Do you think they would want to come down and give us their impressions, of what happened?" They never asked again. There were no follow-up questions like that. What was your mom and dad's name? Right? So now I've got all of these new witnesses that are unnamed. But I, in fact, mentioned that in my book, saying, "Hey, we've got 5 other people that we can put in Dealey Plaza. We just can't identify them because of how they're conducting the oral histories. They're not preparing for them. They're simply sitting in a room and saying, they have obviously some prepared questions, but like you said, they're innocuous. They're 25 minutes long, but they've got nothing to say. I think part of that is a lack of preparation.
True. But I'll also say that I think it was just about getting anybody you can. Your specific thing is the JFK history of the assassination, or what you knew about Kennedy. So anybody that had a brief interaction with Kennedy, whether it was at a conference and you shook his hand, or you saw him one day riding through the parade, then it became the whole thing about the background of what my family was like thinking of JFK and all these. There's a lot of stuff where I'm like, all right, maybe it's interesting, I guess, for you. And again, we're all at fault of doing that. I did that in the beginning with some episodes on some certain people I discussed with. Maybe I wasn't necessarily, but hold on. The main thing is that I feel like if you talk to enough people, you start getting a line for when someone's feeding you a tale, no matter how good of a convincer that person is. And a lot of times, like certain individuals in those oral histories, they're like, "I found this bullet in the grass," and it's like a casing of a rifle. It's like, what the hell is that even?
Talking about, yeah.
So it's like, it becomes convincing, but again, is it for the sake of just going with it because it's uncomfortable for you as the interviewer, or maybe it's the interviewer's fault? Again, we're all at fault at doing that at times, I think. But even like with Burt Griffin, for instance, the only trustworthy thing I can ever pull out audio-wise when it comes to what a witness said when they said it has been the HSCA audio tapes I've been listening to. And I do trust some of the LBJ phone calls because I do feel like they fill in some holes for me where a lot of the Kennedy things lead and there's like a lot of gaps. And I do believe it's that background environment. And again, I don't think he could have been lying on the tapes or kind of covering it in the best of light, but a lot of them are pretty damning just to his character and his personality that give you enough evidence to be like, I think he's just being straightforward with it. But again, Burt Griffin's HSCA tapes. You hear him in interviews now. I think me and Tim have discussed a little bit briefly, and then I've discussed it with David Scheim. But, he changes now. You listen to him now, he's nothing like the HSCA audio tapes will say. But that's like that with even Jack Revel's testimony is the most honest to me in the HSCA. Very critical of the Dallas police work. They asked him, do you think you did a good job? He goes, of course we did it. The president's dead. Our job was to protect the president. And he even talks about that he thinks that someone let Jack Ruby in through a side door. And then he states Don Flush, who sadly was dead at the time and could not be interviewed for the HSCA. But again, these are all important things that for me, I get a sense of that this person is not just doing this for the sake of a book or vanity or any of these things. It's much like when I talk to you, Tim, and much when I talk to you, Craig. I get a sense of I'm doing this because I care about the historical or the factual thing. And it's very hard for a lot of people to sense if that's true because, again, they have their own perspectives. Seth Cantor was a name I had mentioned to you guys off air. He had written a lot about Jack Ruby, and we use a lot of his statements of if he saw Ruby at Parkland, all this type of stuff. I find him hard to trust now, not on that evidence. And there's other things that lead me there. But his statements alone coming from his mouth, I would need confirmation, like you said, Craig, with something else, because later he wrote about Johnson and looked into oil connections. And I think he went way too deep. And it's like when you see, you buy a Jeep and then you start seeing Jeeps everywhere. That's what happened with him. And I think that happened, same thing for a name I'll mention for the RFK assassination, but not relating to that. Thomas Noguchi did a great job on the RFK autopsy, one of the best in history. Fast forward to Natalie Wood, he's speaking at a press conference and turned it into this thing about an actress falling off a boat and she was on drugs. And Natalie never took drugs. But again, you look at where his career happened after the RFK autopsy, what happened later on. He became the glorified Hollywood, trauma doctor or whatever, the coroner of the stars, I believe his name was.
So was Dr. Silhouette. And he fell out of favor with a lot of researchers because he simply would not entertain the idea that the impossibility of the magic bullet wasn't the position of the men in the limousine. It was the physical impossibility of one bullet doing all that damage and coming out unscathed. So even people who say that the men were lined up and the bullet was chemically produced so that it could go through two men at one time, it's this bullet, these two men, these wounds that make the single bullet theory impossible. So I don't know if I've told you this, Robbie, in some of our other podcasts, but he actually dipped his toe. He fell out of favor with me because he dipped his toe into the Fred Hampton case. In his book, one of his books, he wrote authoritatively about the Fred Hampton case, and he had nothing to do with it. He had absolutely nothing to do with the case. He wasn't called by the family. He was not a consultant like he was with Thomas Noguchi, because Thomas Noguchi documented that. And the descriptions of both the wounds and Fred's position in his bed at the time that he was shot were wrong. So if he had had the autopsy materials with him, the reports, he wouldn't have made those mistakes. But he made a lot of medical mistakes in recalling Fred Hampton's two autopsies because he never mentioned the third autopsy.
What happens a lot of the times, you guys, is that when you get and I'm kind of guessing here, so bear with me. I think what happens, at least what possibly happens, is that we write a book and we become famous, whatever that means. It's all relative, I guess. But what happens is now you think that you have this mantle laid upon you, and you must speak about every issue that comes up, every famous case. Nobody's that good. I'm sorry, just not. And so instead of saying, well, maybe I'll look into that, we just, like with Weck, he jumps on the Hampton case. Someone asked me, what do you know about Fred Hampton, Tim? I'm going to say, Craig Ciccone. That's what I know about Fred Hampton. I haven't looked into it. So for me to talk and act like I do, especially around someone like Craig who knows it, he will spot a foul in about 3 seconds. So why would I do that? I don't have to do that, so I don't. It's ridiculous. We just say we don't know sometimes, but a lot of people are afraid. It's a pride thing. I don't know why, but they just will not say, I don't know.
Do you know who the author was that created The Thing? It's Stephen King, right?
The Thing?
The Thing, the movie The Thing.
That's a John Carpenter film.
Okay, maybe I'm blanking on the Stephen King is the one that's on Twitter that constantly has an opinion about every single thing just because he's like an established writer. That's the first example I thought of when you said that, because it seems like he needs to immediately go out there and start preaching a bunch of things. And I'm like, stay in your lane, man. Like, make a movie.
He was interviewed in Dallas when he came and jibber jabbered about the Kennedy assassination.
Because he wrote about the Kennedy assassination.
Oswald did it alone. I mean, talking as if he's, read every file. It's like, Stephen.
Not just Oswald did it, that Oswald dressed up in his mother's clothing and had like this whole tranny angle to him, which was not, am I not allowed to say that? I could say that. I think I could say that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, you can't make this up. You really can't. And Stephen King is no more authority on that than I am Fred Hampton. So quit acting like you are.
But he wrote 11/22/63, and it became a Hulu series. And
yep.
And again, it's that aspect of like the vanity and the stuff like that. Now, I do think there's things that get mentioned that can be said to you, and they just can, like I said, like Craig said, actually, kind of go to compile it with a bunch of other evidence. But Tim, I wanted to ask you. You talked to Michael Baden, and you met the man. I mean, did he seem like he believed what he believed in, or did he seem like he was just not? And no information was entering what you were saying, but he was willing to wait till you were done talking before he said what he had to say. I mean, Weck was the only person in the HSCA that I saw that did not back down from his opinions of calling out his other colleagues and saying that why did they not do these things? It was very simple and would take no resources and barely any time to be able to do this, to make sure you cleared all your avenues when you're trying to investigate this thing, if you really are taking this investigation seriously. And I forgot who was asking him the questions. Was it Gary Underhill? Do you remember the dude's last name? It was the part of the HSCA asking Weck questions. But Cornwall. He was rude in the sense of like, are you sure you want to go against all these other pathologists or all these other panel of your medical experts? And what makes you so sure? It's like, well, he's giving you his opinion. And so far, he's been the only person that didn't just wait till a question was asked for him. He ranted his ass off until he was completely done with what he had to say. And even then, still stuck to his guns.
He spoke at WEC 2003 when I was there. And he gave a talk, nothing new. He wrote, I can't remember the name of his book, called Real Evidence, I think, or something like that. And if you'd read the book, what he said at WEC 2003, it was nothing new under the sun. Seemed like a nice feller, but beyond that, I didn't walk away impressed at all. Again, I'm not sure how he had stayed up with the evidence. It didn't appear as if he did real well. But he wrote a book. And he was at the HSA asking all kinds of questions. So as far as Baden is concerned, I can remember sitting in Cyril Weck's basement. He had all the speakers over there on a Saturday night, 2003. And so we're all down. It's actually, funny story, it's the only house I've ever been in my life where it was so big I got lost. It was kind of embarrassing. But anyway, we were down there eating, and Baden was there. Baden was, kind of holding court about saying things about Oswald. And I was sitting with my friend. I was sitting with Grodin and Walt Brown. And Walt Brown began to ask him questions and correcting Baden about every single thing, just factoids. Everything Baden was saying, Walt would go, no, that's not right. And boom, 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 here's what actually happened. It was kind of embarrassing for Baden. And he was nice about it, but he also corrected him with no. So, Baden, typical. He's a specialist. And in his specialty, he's probably very, very good. But that does not mean he knows the case just because he was the head of the forensic pathology panel. I was, as a medical doctor, what can I say? But the facts of the case, as I was listening to him articulate that night at Wexel, he did not know the case at all. If you would have asked him, what's the one gentleman's name? He is the African-American gentleman who was on a lot of the documentaries. Harold Norman. To ask him, who's Harold Norman? He wouldn't have a clue what you're talking about. You said, who's Junior Jarman? He would not. So very, very specialized. It reminds me of a quote from, there's a wonderful book. The author's name is Ortega E. Gasset, called The Revolt of the Masses. And in that book, I think it's chapter 9 or chapter 12, I can't remember. And it's entitled, barbarization of specialization. Where in the book he says that a specialist is no more than a learned ignoramus. That's so true. And we all are guilty of that. You know, whatever our specialty is, it blocks us from a lot of other things that obviously you just can't know. Nobody has that much time. But it to me, the whole point of this is it should cause us to be a little humble, you know, and just be honest with people and quit acting like we know everything about everything. We don't, you know.
Yeah, it goes back to the adage, jack of all trades, master of none. And I don't know which one I'd rather be. However, before we leave Noguchi and Wecht, um, I give a pass to Noguchi too. Noguchi reminds me of the Willie Nelson of forensic pathologists. That they tried to destroy his career so thoroughly that for months, no, years after the RFK, him just doing his job, he was brought up on scandals, fraud charges. He had to spend a great deal of money just to clear his name and just to retain his position at the Los Angeles coroner's office.
Didn't they fire him, Craig?
Well, they tried to, but that's one of the things that he was trying to get reinstated, which he did. Uh, but the problem is that they had the IRS looking into him, they had the FCC looking into him, and fraud charges, all that kind of stuff. If he was going to make a little money on the side being a celebrity pathologist, I got no problem with that. Wecht, on the other hand, you just described the house he bought, right, or had, whatever. The man did not need money, given that he was already an established forensic pathologist. He had a national career, a national reputation, maybe even international reputation. The boards that he was on, the schools that he even taught at, plus his consulting fees, plus of course him being the
Coroner,
the chief medical examiner for Allegheny County. He had a very good living. He did not have to, do alien autopsies. He didn't have to do the O.J. Simpson case. He didn't have to do Fred Hampton. He didn't have to do any of that. He could have just, and with the kind of money that fame provided him, that security that fame provided him. You remember, now I'm trying to think exactly where he said it. Was it one of the conferences or was it one of the documentaries in which he said he didn't want to sound indelicate, but you could do ballistics tests with cadavers. So you buy a car, you put cadavers in the car, you take that same kind of gun, that same kind of ammunition, and you shoot and you shoot and you shoot and you shoot. How difficult would that be? Well, when was the last time in his career did Wecht fund any experiments like that? He could have. People give their bodies to science and they can use them any way they want. I don't even want to talk about some of the ways that bodies are.
One of the things that Baden knew about that argument, and his retort against Wecht's argument of doing that is that you can't. It's not the same thing shooting bullets through a live human where the blood is coursing through their veins.
Absolutely. And those people who take silicone heads and shoot through them, and they fall a certain way off of a step ladder. That's because it's not attached. It's not attached to the neck. I get that. But that wasn't Wecht's point. The whole point wasn't to recreate it. Absolutely. You can't. There's no physical way that you can absolutely recreate it. But we're talking about probabilities. We're not talking about certainties, especially when you talk about, eyewitnesses or the evidence or anything like that. Even people who change their testimony. You talk about the best available evidence and what the patterns show you. Like Seth Cantor is a great example. So he claims that he saw Jack Ruby at Parkland Hospital. Even if you do not find any other witnesses to corroborate that, we've already established that Jack Ruby was in lots of places he shouldn't have been, including the press conference of the district attorney in Dallas, correcting him on Oswald's background. So you've already established that Ruby knows more than he already said, and he's in places he's not supposed to be. So the likelihood, it wouldn't be unreasonable to say that yes, Jack Ruby, at least briefly, for whatever reason, may have made an appearance at Parkland Hospital.
I would use it as supporting evidence. I wouldn't use it as my main go-to.
Exactly.
Some people do. David Chime does. I respect David Chime's work, and I respect the conversations I've had with him, but he's a lot of people's top example when they use for Ruby being places where he shouldn't be, which I think you can just look at photos and notice he was at the press conference.
Yeah, exactly. He's not the only source. Believe me, Dave Chime is not the only source. There are other researchers.
Again, you interview people, you do the research, you do the footwork, and you start uncovering little tidbits of information. The guy I talked to who was friends with Donald Jeffries, who came on here, talked about how close he got with Margaret Oswald. I'm blanking on his name, but I'll link his episode down in the description if you're listening to this part of this. And he talked about interviewing, who was the guy with the giant hat that was handcuffed up? Oswald, when he was walking out of the... Lavelle. He talked about interviewing him and talked about, certain things, like did he always believe it was like Oswald? Was there anything else they gave him? And it talked about something about an interrogation with Oswald that he stood in on or something. It was one of the interrogations that they had. And Oswald had said something about, why don't you ask the colored people that were on the floor if I was there or something like that. And then they were like, I forgot what he said, but he said, how would I know that they were there if I wasn't there myself? And that's basically what the words that came out. And then Lavelle's answer to him was, that's when I started to have doubts. Because obviously, how would he know that there was those people on that floor?
How would Ruby have known what he said about Oswald? The very place. How would he have known that? Or when Oswald is going through the hallway and he says, "I'm just Apache," nobody bothers to say, "Really, for whom?" Seemed to be a good follow-up.
Care to elaborate? Yeah, but that's why they moved him so quickly, and one of the reasons why they did not have any kind of recording of the 11, 12 hours of interrogation that Oswald faced before he was killed. Now, you can chalk up maybe one or two of those sessions not being recorded or not having a stenographer there as inconvenience or oops or whatever, but all 12 hours didn't have anything written down or recorded. That's
you can't go buy an audio cassette recorder. That'd be pretty inexpensive, I would think, for the sheriff's department.
Even with certain things that we've seen, we not Mandela affected ourselves, but there's certain extended pieces that the original one that maybe everyone has seen, the popularized video of Jack Ruby shooting Oswald. I think over and over again, I've heard statements of Jack saying, "You son of a bitch." I've heard it in documents and like certain interviews and stuff like that. He doesn't say that on that tape. And you could say it's the recording. I can tell you Paul Abbott has the most extensive footage of that basement. That means when I think we all remember the famous photo or video where Ruby jumps up, shoots Oswald in the gut. Oswald goes down, they tackle Jack Ruby, then an ambulance pulls up to the side and they throw Oswald in there. That's not what happened. The full video is actually longer than that. Oswald goes back into the police department and then the ambulance comes out, stretcher comes out, they go in and grab him, and then it's about like a 5-minute process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because
let me get my point in. A lot of people don't know that extent of that. So again, are people misremembering something and then it was said and they go, yeah, I think that's what I heard, and that becomes the memory all these years later? It's influencing, like the issue with the showing the Warren Commission members the Zapruder film or something like that. Like they didn't want to influence their truth or whatever their conclusion was going to be. And it's like influencing it with what the footage that would show us exactly which way Kennedy's head went. Again, it sounds crazy, but that's a lot of issues when it comes to what statements and what conclusions people reach. Again, that brings up the theory, was the film altered? I don't need to get into the alteration of the film and the aspect of that, but boiling it down to, it seems like it's just a snake biting its own tail over and over again. And I think the best thing you can do here when you're looking at the case and we're talking about witnesses and stuff, you can use all this stuff as supporting evidence for anything. But I think you have to kind of take it as that. And again, things you can be told at a conference or whatever. There's a lot of interesting tidbits I could tell you. I had a guy on here about male psychology and talking about male mental health because it's like the males are the most popular ones to commit suicide, apparently. But he was on here discussing this, and he had been a bartender at a bar Arlen Specter frequented. And he said, the only thing I could tell you about Arlen Specter, because I know you have an interest in the Kennedy case, is when I used to deliver drinks to tables, Arlen Specter would get the same martini every time he came in, and it would have to be 3 olives exactly on a toothpick placed above his martini glass, brought over to his table and placed directly in front of him, not off to the side. It had to be directly in his like front, like in the middle of him. And when he told me that, I was like, that's a weird fucking dude. Because again, I use that as supporting evidence for like, you know, certain things when it comes to his conclusions on things. But I think in my rational perspective, and I think it's a rational estimate to make, that if you're going to believe that a bullet can transverse 2 people, make all those wounds and come out perfectly pristine, or is it more acceptable at the fact that he was given a task of, here's all these wounds in these victims, and it was caused by 1 bullet, make it fit.
That's exactly.
Investigations are done by people, and people are wrong all the time. Sorry to take the floor for so long about
No, absolutely. And Tim, you might be able to speak more about this as far as yeah, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, Robbie, your point about film. Anytime you see a film that's edited for whatever content it's being used for, yeah, you have to think to yourself, is that all of it? Did someone else's perspective or lens influence what we're seeing right now? We absolutely should see the entire episode, or we should all be as intimately familiar with the episode of Oswald's death as one knows about the Zapruder film and John Kennedy's death. But the fact that we don't, the fact that it's always been altered, even photographs that appear in a newspaper in '63, to do the newspaper research on the immediate coverage of the assassination, whether you're looking for witnesses that reporters grabbed or photographs that were taken immediately from the 3 camera cars that we had, both still and motion picture. Those are incredibly important to recover and to see in its entirety, because that's the context right there. Selected by someone else's lens. I think that's one of the reasons the Warren Commission members not seeing the Zapruder film until late, because they didn't want to influence their thought. I think it's one of the reasons why it took so long for the Warren Commission members to actually visit Dealey Plaza. However, we do see film of some of the members going up to the Texas School Book Depository, going into the 6th floor window. Do we have any film footage of the Warren Commission members visiting any of the other buildings in Dealey Plaza?
Not that I'm aware.
This were where reported shots were fired. Did they go behind the picket fence? Did they go on top of the triple underpass? I just don't know. I've never seen film footage of that. And that would also be telling. Either they were selective in what they saw when they visited the entire crime scene, which then again talks about predisposition, or we haven't seen the film. And why, after all this time?
Robbie, did you see the full film of Oswald?
Getting shot?
Yeah, did Abbott show you the entire?
I can send you the link to it. And it's actually funny, for 13 minutes, the armored truck could not fit down the...
They had to get it out. Right. They had 2 cars and the armored car.
Yeah.
So they had to get them all out. And yes, trying to do that took up time. So the ambulance could come. Yeah.
Well, no, it's just they wouldn't fit in there. They didn't measure it properly to go down the ramp. So you get to watch 13 minutes of the armored truck going forward, backing out, cops getting out, shaking their head, taking their hat off.
That I have seen, actually. That I have seen. Because the WFAA TV, which affiliate was that in Dallas?
I can't tell you which one, the one I watched, but I could just send you the links.
But WFAA TV, I think it was 1988, the 30th anniversary of the assassination. I have the videotapes. I bought them from that collector in Canada.
So did I. Same thing.
Right. So it was the live broadcast of everything, and they showed it, in its entirety. They basically just pressed play, and the audience was there for the next 2 days. So I've seen footage of that.
I don't know where that guy got all of his stuff in Canada, but man, he had stuff that nobody else had. That's where I got all the HSCA stuff, was from that guy.
It was called the Collector's Archives, and now his name escapes me. And that sucks.
Yeah.
But anyway, Collector's Archives, and that's when I first started in 85. That was my go-to for articles, for books, everything, photographs. Yep. Anyway,
going on kind of along those lines again, when you're looking at certain things in this case, obviously there's a lot of easy things you can run with and go certain directions and stuff like that. But I think from our own information and looking and digging and talking and, explaining these on many different podcasts, we've been able to kind of go into some details and get a little bit more clarity on certain things. Where, like for instance, when Tim called Ida Docs and had a discussion with Ida Docs, and she said certain things on the phone. Tim, you can recount those events if you'd like as well too, that were kind of different than what maybe a lot of people know about, like the medical drawings. But it is, again, what Tim heard on the phone. You can take it for what you want, take our belief of it, but from my perspective, it holds more weight because of the honesty factor of you're not trying to sales pitch anything. You're giving me time to talk on a show right now and talk to viewers out there, but you're not asking for anything. You even have told people, both of you have told people, if you want to get the book or I'll send you a copy. You've been very open, so the marketing factor is not there. And a lot of people can say it's because it's for views or it's for this. The authenticity reigns true. And to me, that gives me more perspective on what you heard or what you asked. And again, we don't have the recording, so overall it's just kind of hearsay. But, it holds a little bit more weight compared to what all the other people want to choose to believe what someone said or what they wrote in their book after changing their opinion 40 years later, and now it fits your narrative and you want to run with that. I don't know. For me, it's just a little bit more about, like, I'm pretty sure the evidence of a cover-up is there 100%. There's no denying that fact. I'm not saying who did it. You can fight over that all you want. My whole thing is just trying to prove factually what makes, like, this is what we can prove. There's no question about it. The Secret Service destroyed files when the Assassination Records Review Board requested for them. And they still destroy files now. That's an ineptitude in the Secret Service, whether that's important to cover up their own misgivings. But analyzing, a Katzenbach memo or something like that was released 2 days after, and then hearing Katzenbach talk in the HSCA and give some of the most honest explanations, or the I don't knows, because he didn't want to answer. Listening to a lot of that kind of changed my opinion on if Katzenbach was involved or not. I think he was just doing his job, and I think he was given an order. And Craig, you can disagree with me if you'd like.
No, it recalled for me listening to some of the interviews, depositions of the police officers and even FBI agents in the Fred Hampton case. They were masters at the I don't recall. I mean, it was, an hour and a half of an interview. How many hundreds of questions and follow-up questions, and every one of them, I don't recall. It was that's the line that you're, as an FBI agent, you're trained to do that. You're not effusive, you're not forthcoming, you're not, so when you talk about people's even ability to answer in some of these cases, I mean, are they even aware that they're doing it, or is it just automatic that it's so drilled into them that they just, I'm not envisioning them sitting there with a shit-eating grin on their face as they're duping the interviewer or the lawyer who's deposing them. I'm just saying there are so many factors involved in the interviewer and interviewee and the motivations behind both the questions and the answers that I think that's what draws Tim and I to these witnesses, or a study of the witnesses, because for whatever reason, either they do change or they stay mostly the same until there's a monetary fact. There are just so many variables that it's a fascinating study, and one that needs to be done, and people need to be held accountable for their statements, which is one of the reasons why I say that the people who are running the Sixth Floor Museum in Dallas, they have a responsibility that whenever they interview somebody, they have to be as prepared as possible. They have to have intimate knowledge of what this person already said, so that they can not just take the oral history for the fuzzy, warm feelings about Kennedy and what he brought to this country at that time, and the effect of him not being there anymore and not influencing culture or society or politics, but also them as a material witness to a horrific crime that still is largely unsolved. So,
Tim, before you explain the Ida Doc stuff, which I want you to do, just because I mentioned it earlier, you can also use documentation, which there is documentation of a lot of these things that you say, like, oh, they didn't bother getting. There is stuff like that. There is an interview with someone talking about finding a skull fragment, this big. He talks about it in an oral history interview and talks about it. you can find the document and what radio show he did say it on, because there is a time for it. There's not an interview like a recording, but there is a script and like a transcript of it. And there is him at like 3 or something or 7 in the afternoon, him finding a piece of a skull fragment different from the Harper fragment, which only improves his testimony or validity of his testimony or his statement in his oral history interview.
Everything on the oral history thing on the 6-4 museum site, can you get a hold of all those?
Some are free, but a lot of them are not. You have to have a membership for. But I'm also a kid of the technology age, and there's some things that the JFK History Museum doesn't know about how to get past a subscription basis. Hopefully they're not listening. If you're listening, hey, you know what? Just toss me a free membership. It's like the Mary Farrell site. I'm not paying you that much money per month to look at documents. You should be paying me to read this shit.
Tim and I did. No, you absolutely should. The Mary Farrell Foundation, you should absolutely contribute to, whether you use the site or not. That's not the point. That kind of site is absolutely essential. So you give money to that. The JFK Library, maybe not so much, but then again, you are funding its future. So, but as far as the oral history project, I don't think you need a subscription. I never had a subscription. Maybe it changed last year.
You definitely need a subscription for it. There's a lot of videos that when you click on it, it says link cannot be found or archived or something like that.
Okay, all right, but they are available, whether you go down there in person or you can request copies of either the transcript or the DVD of the video. But it will tell you online whether or not it has been transcribed. They've done a lot of oral histories that have not yet been transcribed. So we don't even know what these witnesses saw or if they're actual material witnesses to the Kennedy assassination. I'm just saying.
Well, hold on. Before we get off a different thing. Tim, Ida Docs, bro, real quick. I did like a lot of stuff, archival material, like even with the LBJ library, there's 45% of the Johnson JFK archives, the assassination stuff, 45% of that is digitized. All the rest of it hasn't even gotten to yet. So there's still a lot we don't know about certain individuals or certain things that were brought up in conversations. Also, same thing with Ethel Kennedy on the day RFK was killed. That conversation is online. I have messaged the library, spoke to Sheila Blackford. I have gotten unpublished Nixon tapes that are like 8 hours long that are just the worst audio quality ever. But certain key names have popped up in those tapes. John Connolly, other things. It's just very unreadable until I can get my AI software working to be able to fix that. But listening to that certain information, again, there's a lot of stuff that, besides jumping to conclusions, why isn't it out 60-something years later? I'll leave that as an ending question, but Tim, Ida Docs.
But sorry, before you begin, Tim, I should know this or I should remember this. Were those the only 3 drawings that Docs did? Or
there was a 4th one. And the 4th one you can actually see on the famous 1988 Nova documentary. It was one on the side of the head.
Okay.
So there was a 4th, but the HSCA never published it. But it does appear on the 1988 documentary Nova.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, the Ida Docs thing was just pure luck. I was looking in David Lipton's book, and there was a picture that she had drawn of the brain. It was Exhibit F-302, and it wasn't signed. I thought, well, that's odd. She signs everything. I mean, this isn't exactly, breaking news, for goodness sakes. I was just curious why she didn't sign it. That's all I cared about. Very minor detail.
No, it's not.
Huh?
It's not a minor detail. That establishes,
Exactly.
that it's hers.
And so a friend of mine who seemed to at that time have everybody's phone number. He got me her phone number, and she lived in, you're not going to believe it, Bethesda, Maryland. And so I called her up. It was October 14th, and she did not want to talk to me. And I was very polite, as I always am, very kind. I said, Miss, I have some questions for you. The questions I asked her were verbatim out of her HSCA testimony, every single one. And every answer she gave me was a lie. Well, it contradicted and was at variance with what she said for the HSCA. And so I said, I'm sitting there thinking, why are you lying to me? Why? I mean, these aren't tough questions, for goodness sakes. But everything she said, and she kept getting madder and madder. She said, well, why don't you just get a hold of Professor Blakey? He'll know. And I said, well, I have talked to him, ma'am. And I tried to deflect that and keep talking with her. And by the end of the first conversation, she told me, don't you ever contact me. And she slammed down the phone, which in those days, you could slam down a phone. It meant something. Now you'll boop.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it doesn't have the same. Yep.
So I waited exactly 2 weeks, and I called her back. And she still wasn't happy about talking with me, but she was a little more forthcoming. And I just began to ask her questions. I says, Ida, were you given copies of these autopsy photographs? Because she said that it was tedious work to take home. And she said, oh, no, no, not at all. Well, where did you go look at them at? And she, well, I had to go into a room and there was a CIA agent watching every move that I made. Okay. And I said, well, Ida, I said, I've gotten everything with your name on from National Archives. And there's a series of memos that appear that back and forth between Flanagan and Corwell and Bodden saying, for example, we need to get pictures of gunshot wounds to Ida. And I thought, why? You have the autopsy photographs. Why would they be necessary? So that's when I asked Michael Bodden at WEC 2003, Dr. Bodden, did you give Ida Dox pictures of gunshot wounds to superimpose on the autopsy photographs? Without hesitation, he goes, absolutely, we did. I was not expecting that. I was like, I was ready, locked and loaded for him to deny it. But he capitulated, said, absolutely, we did. I said, can I ask why? He goes, because we wanted to make sure that whoever was looking at them would not mistake the wound and make sure that they knew exactly where we placed the wound, which was in the cowlick area. I said, but it wasn't in the cowlick area. I said, here's the thing about it, Dr. Bodden. Dr. Humes had the body right in front of him. As inept as that autopsy may have been, he was inches away from everything on JFK's body. And he said, that, as you know, the wound was low and I think the exact wording was slightly to the right of midline and 2.5 centimeters above the external occipital protuberance. And I said, but you raised it about 4 inches in the cowlick area. He goes, well, Humes was wrong. I said, well, Humes had the body and you have photographs. I said, I don't know what to say. I said, that seems a little ridiculous to me that you're basing it on a photograph. You didn't have the body. You didn't dig up the body to look at JFK's corpse. But Ida lied on every single question I asked her. She wanted nothing to do with it. She said she did not get pictures, even though I have documents from the National Archives which said she did get pictures. At one point, Bodden even sends her a memo. Ida, you can do better. And I'm thinking, better than what? She is a professional medical illustrator from Johns Hopkins University. She's the best of the best, my friend. I have her a book she put out on autopsy, and medical illustrations. She's a phenomenal artist, which why are we shocked at that, for God's sakes? So I didn't really understand. I said, Ida, you can do better. Now, does Ida, you can do better mean you're not saying what we want you to say? I don't know. I mean, the documents I got from the archives were pretty thorough. I even knew what she was eating every day, for goodness sakes. I have documentary documents of that. And she was paid very, very well, as a matter of fact, in 1978. So that all came about by complete and utter accident. I wasn't trying to uncover anything. It just, boom. And I had people. David Lifton was one of them saying, oh, leave that woman alone. She's just a poor old woman. She wasn't trying to, I said, Lifton, trust me, I'm not trying to be slick here. I'm not trying to be confrontational. I just had a few questions for her. And everything she said was at variance with what she said before the HSCA. It was the strangest conversation. I did after the second conversation, because I had her address too, and I sent her a one of the pictures she had drawn for the HSCA, and I asked her if she'd autograph it and send it back. Well, that was 28 years ago. I haven't seen it. And she's now dead, so and she married a medical doctor, a guy by the name of Dr. Maloney. So her real name was really Ida Maloney, legally, but of course she went by Ida Dox, and she was nice, but she was not happy to talk with me. I can tell you that. And I was about as laid back as you can get. I mean, even when I challenged her, it was pretty laid back challenge.
I want to make sure that I heard you correctly. You just asked for the same questions that who asked her for HISCA? Who questioned her for the House Select Committee?
I should know this. I want to say Cornwell, but
yeah, he did a lot of the medical, right?
I think it was Cornwall because his voice sounded familiar. Because I don't think there's a video portion for Ida.
But you asked her the same.
I meant there's a DVD, but out of the ones I got, I think there was the ending of hers is what I got because she did. Okay. I do have those clips up there on my channel. People can look at the testimony of Ida Dox. But I think it was Gary Cornwall that was asking the questions. So. He did a lot of that.
Yeah, and he was at WECT, and I should have asked him.
Right, but you asked her the same questions he did.
Yeah, I verbatim. And by the way, and here's the thing about it: when I got my big packet from the National Archives, they had the questions and the person asking, which I believe is Cornwall, they asked her those things behind closed doors before she ever came out publicly. So when she heard those questions, they were the exact questions they had asked her behind closed doors. There was nothing, no surprise. And so those questions became the official questions, and they became my questions. And every one she answered differently. So
I even think we're skipping over one of the biggest witnesses, which is Marina Oswald. I mean, obviously her fluctuating statements, but her changes of statements might be because of some type of forced interrogation or threat of deportation. But if you listen to the HSCA tapes and what she had to say with those, I think it's pretty revealing. That kind of says you can't use her at all, which is funny because people on the conspiracy side, mostly the lone nut side, will talk about the identification of Oswald's rifle and the varying other factors that kind of laid the guilt, which laid the guilt of the eyes of the American people as well, too, when the Warren Report was established or when the commission was officially done and the volumes were out. People that read the report, the summary, used it as like, well, his wife said it, and who knows him better than his wife? But again, questions were asked by Sawyer and others that were on the HSCA that were very good questions. Certain things about asking, do you know the difference between a rifle and a shotgun? Well, no. What? The size of it? And it's like, what? It's like, no, the different ammunition, bunch of different stuff, like distance. These were important things that completely erase the Warren Commission using Marina Oswald as identifying her husband's rifle. Again, you look at some of the stuff the HSCA did, and I'm not agreeing with 100% of it. I believe there were some errors, like the Stephen Louis Witt thing. They turned that into a big joke, which kind of ruined the reputation of the HSCA for a lot of people. But I think if you really ask the questions, the ones that we're still even asking today, the HSCA did that. I listened to the audio tapes over and over again, and I have divided them by certain speakers and people that were doing certain things. Floyd Fithian being a good example of, kind of questioning the umbrella man and pointing out the absurdity of it, not just joking at it when everyone's ducking when they're showing the umbrella. But him just asking, so you own a lot of umbrellas. Is that fair to say? Like certain things like, why do you have so many? And like, it's starting to sound like BS myself. But even going into that a little bit more, Sawyer asking James Gale of the FBI, what's a 201 file? And him giving a smart response back. And he goes, well, I don't know. I thought you worked for the Bureau for 30 something years. I think you know what a damn 201 file is. And he goes, okay, and just starts giving one-word responses. These are things where you started to see people on the committee were even starting to be like, hey, you know what, you're kind of bullshitting me. Again, fast forward to John Connolly's testimony, Tim, we've kind of gone in depth a little bit on and played some clips on. Yeah, he gave a different perspective of things for me because, you always hear this theory that gets tossed out there, which honestly, I think it's just gotten confused. Connolly wanted, or JFK wanted Connolly to ride with him, and Johnson wanted Connolly to ride with him, and they were feuding over Connolly. That's not necessarily the truth. You're right about a feud, and it wasn't even really a big, thing. The feud was between Yarborough and John Connolly, and this had been going on long before, and there are articles about that as well too, press stories, and different LBJ phone calls talking about it. Let me tell you, Johnson had talked to Yarborough a lot. He might not have liked Yarborough that much or didn't think of him much in the beginning, but they grew a relationship after the Kennedy assassination. And the whole thing was about where was Yarborough going to ride and where was Connolly going to ride, because they could not be in the same car together. So it wasn't a planned thing. Johnson, wasn't trying to get his friend Connolly in the way or anything like that. It wasn't anything like that. It was more about understanding, and even from John Connolly not being 100% honest in the HSCA, but stating that it was Yarborough didn't want to ride with Johnson. That's not necessarily true. All the evidence and all the other varying individuals kind of report that it was that. But again, this is stuff you listen, it expands your own opinion and understanding. And again, I'm listening to John Connolly in that. He was admitted to not really, even though he did the route or helped with the route and supposed to handle whether they wanted the women's trade building or the trade mart or whatever, that thing he didn't check. He let his people do it. Why? Because he was more obsessed with getting his re-elections. And this might upset you a little bit, Craig, but, it's from my own perspective of talking to certain individuals. A lot of people who study MLK and study things about civil rights are not giant fans of Kennedy. I say that because, and a lot of people think Kennedy was civil rights. It's because he didn't live to achieve his accomplishments. That's it. I'm not saying he wouldn't have done it. But he didn't. Has been my reception from Martin Luther King historians and other people that have studied their perspective of history, much like the Johnson people studying their Johnson perspective compared to the Kennedy people studying their Kennedy perspective. If you get stuck in that one thing, you're going to have a one-sided view. And I think, again, all this stuff is a combination of events that you use together to help form through all of these dead ends and all these other things that people just go, we don't have the evidence for that. Instead of jumping to a conclusion like, okay, Baker scandal drops with Johnson. This drops with Johnson. Johnson becomes president. He must be the guy. He got rid of Kennedy so he could be president. Okay, well, if you use it like that, it sounds pretty good. But if you overall look at who benefited, a lot of people did. And overall, you start gathering a more rounded perspective, which again still hints at conspiracy. It has nothing to do with the conspiracy. It's just not going down the road of who did it.
Because you just mentioned people who benefited from or wanted Kennedy dead. I don't think enough emphasis is placed on. It's not just that; it's that no motive could be pinned on Oswald, and in fact, quite the opposite of the kind of motivation you would think in a political assassination. Our three other presidential assassins had well-reasoned, well-thought-out, well-stated reasons for their delusional motivation for killing the president. Oswald was completely opposite. So even though, Marina Oswald may or may not be able to differentiate between a rifle and a pistol, did she take that photograph? Did he have those weapons? Yeah, but you can't put them in his hands on November 22nd, 1963. But you can't pin a motive onto him, and that is incredibly troubling. Now, going back a little ways about Hiska, and Tim, you may completely revise your opinion of me. I have never been able to look at Hiska with enough of impartiality. To me, the second that Louis Stokes took over for Richard Sprague, when Richard Sprague was outed as chairman of Hiska, I knew that the investigation was over before it even began.
Six was in.
So absolutely. So I have more weight for the Assassination Record and Review Board than I do a Hiska.
Okay.
They weren't supposed.
Don't compare the Assassination Records Review Board with Hiska, because Assassination Records Review Board was an actual trying to get documents out and get the truth out there. They revealed more information.
Yes, but they were not an investigative body, even though they still investigated. That was the beautiful thing about that board and about the work that they did. It was almost very sly in the way they investigated.
No, nobody. Tunheim said we didn't know what power we had.
Absolutely.
Jeremy Gunn going through and just James Gunn. James Gunn's the director for Guardians of the Galaxy.
Jeremy Gunn.
Gotta get those mixed up, man. I'm telling you. But him asking the questions, nobody knew they had the power to do that, and specifically, those were the right questions to ask.
Right, right.
But I will say
the right people to interview and the right questions to ask.
Tim might not take issue with the HSCA of Stokes. I will defend Stokes. He asked some pretty good questions when it got down to how much of this information, how many of these things that you stated, Marina, were put into Marina and Lee. Again, the influence of who the hell is that lady that did that?
Sheila McMillan.
When they talked about Stokes asked about her coffee. There's a ring in the coffee cup that was left there that morning, and apparently it was on the nightstand or something like that everyone believes, or something like that. Like, where did that just come up out of the cup? Like, did he not have that on his finger? Like, you said this in the book, and a lot of things Marina kind of backtracked on that looked like it just got put in a book for the sales effort.
Did Oswald have a ring on his finger when he was taking the backyard photographs?
No.
So what does that mean?
Yeah, actually, he did.
He did on his left hand, right?
Well, it depends what picture you look at. On one picture, it's on his left, the other one's on his right.
Fuck. I'm not getting that.
But the photos are legitimate.
But another name that pops out of the HSA for that is, I'm blanking on his last name, but Robert, and I'll post his clips down below. To look up the clips on my channel about the photograph, what was written on the back. They asked over and over again about those photographs. What did you write on the back? And who wrote this? Did you write this? And Marina was not sure if she wrote it or not. I'm pretty sure you would remember writing something. You know, it's not that long of time where you're like, I'm never going to forget that if I wrote that on the photo or not. And these, Hunter a fascist or something like that? The translation gets mixed up in those clips I show you. It says Hunter for fascists, Hunter of fascists. These types of like silly types of remarks and stuff like that. And again, the people asking those questions, like, you would not do this with the Russian T or over the I. It wouldn't make sense unless a child was writing it. Like, what's your standard on education? And she was like, I was a nurse. And he was like, well, you wouldn't do this or that, or this is old grammar. I'm not understanding, this silliness here. And that was a very good thing to go into with the HSCA. And again, those times the photographs were taken, if there was neighbors in the backyard, what time was it? She had to give a certain mention. I think the neighbors were out of town or something like that. Like, there was a lot of stuff where you're starting to go, okay, I'm taking the HSCA more seriously. And Stokes was one of those individuals who questioned certain individuals, like people of the FBI and CIA, a little harder than he might have with certain people like Witt, where he did take that less seriously. He joked around and, kind of let other people take the reins from there. But again, you got to remember, at the time that these investigations were happening, they're still voting on the floor of certain bills that were going on. So people had to step out of the room and then come back, and some people didn't get to ask certain questions. But overall, you look at a lot of the thoroughness of it. They were pretty thorough. I will defend that.
I would say this about two things. One real quick. The ARB, if they did nothing else except the medical testimony, I'm good. Holy smoke, that changes everything. As far as the HSCA, it really depends what witness you're talking about, what interrogator you're talking. Some of the stuff was good. Some of the stuff I remember I started reading it for my book. I'm like, oh my God, the fix is in already. And only on question 3. They know exactly where this is going, whether it was Larry Sturtevant or someone like that. But I would say, as important as the medical evidence was for the IRB, my position has always been, I think the acoustic evidence is just as important for the HSCA. If they don't do anything else, I'm good. I mean, I think it's that important. I really do. But of course, that's a presupposition, and the presupposition is that the acoustic stuff is accurate. I think it is. Other people don't. Guess you go have a hamburger. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, for the RFK case, that the comparison for the RFK case would be Stan Brzezinski, and his recording. You've got
Absolutely.
Experts, audio experts, who are saying that they hear 14 distinct shots.
Yeah, I mean, how would you say that in both cases, the acoustics may be the tiebreaker in both of those?
It very well may be, because because so many of the elements in the JFK assassination isn't there for their RFK assassination. So you've got a lot of witnesses packed into a very small place, but it wasn't photographed. So there's pros and cons to both. But as far as Hiska is concerned, yeah, I mean, you can pick and choose the some studies that were done, but the direction of the investigation, it was in my mind, it was woefully inadequate. The direction that Sprague wanted to take, the leads that he wanted to pursue, having to do with Oswald's background, having to do with his travels, having to do with the Cuban connection down in Florida, or at least the South, were going to be incredibly important. And then, of course, you did have Lopez on the case, but how many years was Lopez's report classified?
Long time.
So even though they may have steered, one branch of the investigation in the right direction, we still didn't know the consequence of that investigation. So, and in fact, speaking about the different kinds of investigations, like the House Select Committee on Assassinations and the Assassination Record Review Board, I think we should have a Records and Review Board right now for all of the documents that the Trump administration is releasing on the RFK assassination, Martin Luther King, and even the new JFK assassination documents that have been.
In a way, the HSCA didn't have a choice. And you can blame that on Mary Farrell. She says, fellas, guess what? There may be a tape out there that could have recorded the shots. And people who were in, and I actually have the minutes of that meeting where Blakey brought all the researchers to DC. And that's when this came up. And they said, Blakey almost turned ashen when that came up. It's like, oh my God, now I got to look into this. What am I going to do? And that led to the Acoustical Society of America, James Barger, and all that. But that's not something they discovered. The HSA did not discover that. That was Mary Farrell saying, I got something you may want to look at, fellas. And when they, at the end of the day, at the midnight hour in December 78, guess what? And we all hear him say it. I think there was a 95% probability of a second shooter.
Sorry for the brief interruption. I'll try and find a good segue back into the conversation. I think like when you're looking at like the HSCA, you have not even that, just even the Mary Farrell site. I will give them credit for one thing: the audio that is on there, available on their site. Henry Gonzalez, I believe the name is. If you guys have ever heard that one, he was in the motorcade as well too. He also talked about his film and camera being taken from his car, in which he had extra footage. Again, there was a lot of that going on, and a lot of witnesses, whether they captured something or not. It's just very strange the number of witnesses that also lost audio or lost video footage, or just photos in general. And then we get into the mysterious deaths. And I don't think every single one of them is mysterious. I think a lot of things can be chalked up to whatever, but there was a lot there, and a lot did get over exaggerated in a film. But overall, like the Ida docs barely talked about it as much as they probably should have. It was 5 minutes worth on the HSCA, and then it was over with.
That's
You
like
know,
only 13 or 14 questions.
so again, there should have been more time expanded upon that. And I think with the deaths of people like David Ferry, and others that were in mysterious ways, I'm blanking on the reporter, Jim Cothy, that had it was a blunt force trauma to the throat. Someone said it was a karate chop or something like that.
Dorothy Kilgallen, another journalist. Yeah.
That one is very, very interesting in its own.
For me, it's Lee Bowers Jr.
Lee Bowers is a good one.
You cannot convince me that he wasn't killed outright.
Or who was the guy that was reporter, had glasses, and what was it? Two cops playing with their guns in the hallway, and it went off and shot him. Jim Hunter, I think his name was. Him, and then there was another one in Florida that was like tossed through a plate glass window or something like that. There was a lot of interesting, weird things in a short amount of time for these people, which just seem impossible odds that it could not all be connected in some way. And again,
especially given the importance of the witness, like you're talking about. His name just went out of my head.
Jim Cothy?
No.
Bill Hunter?
Who befriended Oswald? George DeMornshall.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Johnny Roselli.
I see. Yeah, that's mob style. I think that ain't the FBI.
Well, Jack Ruby shooting Oswald by pulling the trigger with his middle finger, that's mafia.
Well, he didn't have an index finger.
Jack Ruby didn't have an index finger.
No, he got it bitten off in a bar fight. You can check his fingerprint records. They don't have a left index finger for his thing. He got it literally. I didn't know this until you look at the photos, and he has his arms crossed like this. It goes down to like right here of the knuckle. It's missing this whole tip part.
But he shot him with his right hand.
Or whichever hand it was. He's missing a finger that he shot with. I know that much. That's why he did it with the middle finger.
Learn something new every day. I did not know that either.
I'll send you the clip of that. And there's also another one too. Everyone keeps saying that Jack Ruby owned multiple clubs. He owned one club. It was just one. It was the Carousel Club. I know your face, Craig. Let me finish. Ready?
I've never heard that he owned several. You
see it in the documents, Silver Spur and all these other things that he allegedly owned or something, another club that he was renovating or something like that. Earl Ruby's testimony, he gave Jack Ruby $5,000 to renovate his club, and she changed it to the Carousel Club. And that's what that was. Now, again, could that explain the Western Union transfer? Was he paying money back? I don't know whether you want to believe that or not. But again, there's all these things that like the HSA was able to reveal to me that was a little bit different. Like I never knew about the carousel thing. And I think I showed Tim on one of our episodes we did, and he didn't know that either. It was something that was an aside, but it was something that was important because again, a lot of people predict Jack Ruby as this club owner who owned like different clubs, and he was like a low-level mafia guy, which honestly, I think he got the club from his sister and he was just running it, and running it into the ground, most likely. And again, he just renovated his club. Next thing you know, the president gets killed, and now every business is shutting down, and he just put money into an advertising thing for his club. So he couldn't get the money back.
Several $1,000s in his car that the IRS confiscated after he was arrested. I know that. So could that have been a payoff from Dallas police? Because someone in the Dallas police let him into the basement. That has been Jack Revel's testimony and a bunch of others that let him into a side door. The HSCA is pretty much on record saying it was Patrick Dean. Yeah. So again, there's a issue there when it comes to what the official thing was of walking down a ramp. So I think the HSCA reveals a lot, like I said. But again, the Henry Gonzalez stolen footage, other audio pieces and interviews and things like that, they're cool asides that help support if you really care about the case.
other things and other varying factors, that there was more than just a lone nut. I don't think you would have this many avenues if it was just a
strange
one.
factoid. Henry Gonzalez had John Connolly's suit in his house
I know that. Yeah.
several months.
That's crazy.
Why did who was it? Was it Curry who had John Connolly's hat? You see bloodstains on his hat.
Oh, that I did not know.
On his coat rack. Just like, with coats, people, visiting, putting their coat on there. There's John Connolly's hat with blood marks on him.
I'm just learning all kinds of things today.
Well, why was Jesse Curry on Air Force One? Why did he need to be
No
there?
shit.
It's because he wanted to be involved in there all the time. I think me and Craig, you've talked about that in the past. But not only that, Malcolm Kilduff was on that thing, and he was the only one to pull out the camera and the little tape recorder because he needed the swearing in to be recorded and photographed.
Right. No, I got to show this to you. So you guys keep talking and I'll listen. But I'm going to find the photo for you.
What the hell were we talking about? Oh yeah, the number of people that were on Air Force One, the swearing in, the late Jacqueline Kennedy's dress being into 2075.
Yep. Liz Carpenter, executive assistant to VP Johnson.
Yeah. So a lot of these people were included onto the Air Force One.
Rob, you had mentioned the photographs and the films taken from people
that were confiscated.
Yeah, they were confiscated. Same thing with Robert Kennedy's assassination. So again, that's going back to what's coincidence and what's deliberate. There's got to be a threshold, and for Tim and I and our weighing into these cases, the threshold.
But the LAPD throwing half of that stuff in a medical furnace is a bit more leaning towards the side of getting rid of that evidence rather than trying to.
Okay, so that was more egregious than, say, Wecht burning his notes in his fireplace at home.
Well, it wasn't Wecht; it was Humes.
I'm sorry, had Wecht on the brain. But yeah,
that's just as bad. I would say those are 100% like him saying that he didn't want it to be products of like the Abraham Lincoln chair or whatever.
No, which is ridiculous because Boswell's autopsy face sheet, they have drops of Kennedy's blood on it. He didn't burn those or could burn that.
But same thing with like the JFK's brain, though. Like, I mean, all those autopsy materials that had gone missing out of the chest, the brain going missing.
Yes, but I know why.
Because you say RFK took it because he was going to reinvestigate his brother's death. Well, you know what? The casket is offshore where my state is. I didn't know this. So I'm going to take some scuba gear and go down there and hopefully no exploding seashells down there that take me out.
No, I'm talking about when in April of 1967, his grave was moved.
I'm talking about the last location of John F. Kennedy. I had sent you this already in a text. Is one of the caskets is dropped off right exactly, I think, between my state and another state.
Yes, I know, but it had, if they switched caskets when they moved the grave, that's fine. But he still put the autopsy materials into the casket that was going to be entombed, not the one that was going to be disposed of. So my theory is that his brain, the photographs, and the slides, the microscopic slides, are all buried with Kennedy right now in Arlington Cemetery.
Why didn't they just cremate him and get this whole thing over with of multiple caskets? Like, they could have just easily just hid that conspiracy up if we just been like, sorry, he's ash.
Because good Catholic people don't do cremation. I don't know.
Maybe.
It's permitted now, but it's somewhat frowned upon, too.
Oh, by the way, LSD's okay though.
A quick correction: the person who deposed Ida Dox was Andy Purdy.
Andrew Purdy.
Yeah, not too shocking. He's medical.
Yeah, so yeah, we do have a lot of similarities in dealing with the physical evidence, specifically the photos and films. The incompleteness of it. Luckily, the California State Archives, they retained a lot of the raw CBS, NBC footage. So you can order a compilation of all that stuff, and especially with the advent of the internet and people uploading stuff, it wouldn't be surprising if from 1 month to the next you discover things that weren't there before. Including these websites that are continuously digitizing their collection and then putting them up online. For the longest time, the Dallas County Municipal Office didn't have any of the original eyewitness statements or interviews, and then they put them all online, and it really facilitated me completing my book because I had it online, which I would have had to go down to Dallas to do, which I haven't been able to do. It's like Maryland.
Well, even statements like for the church committee, Chuck Gokenauer, who I had on the show when we spoke for 2.5 hours, he's documented. He's being like, he was the one that pulled up, I think, the full size image of the Mary Mormon photograph and saw someone spotted on there, and it was all accidental. And then he went and interviewed, I forgot who it was, and I'm sorry, I have to go back to that episode and look at it, but he saw like whiteout photographs of the Oswald photo, and it's not Oswald there, like it was cut out. And, he was looking at a lot of things, and he testified to the church committee, and they never included his testimony, but he does have documents on his name and stuff like that. They're just not, in full. They're like yeah. So again,
that's why continuing to do the research is so essential, because it changes so often. What we can discover. It's not like we've analyzed this to death or investigated it to death or nothing else will come of it. No, I'm hopeful that people continue to embrace the not only release of documents but also the digitization of documents and including them online. So you visit the National Archives online one month, the next month they could have. Oh, actually, that was that one story. Not story. It's the one beautiful indication of that. When the Trump administration first released, the day they released, actually the hour that they released the Robert Kennedy files, both my mentor Paul Lee and I got online and just downloaded as much as we could, as fast as we could, because they included autopsy photographs. Right?
They're brutal.
But then an hour later, they were no longer available, and they had a screen that says you have to be here in person to see this.
Well, I understand that. Again, vanity on that one, because I'm sure the family was very upset about their, RFK laying naked on a table, and I saw those as soon as they got released.
And look, being the keeper of one set of autopsy photographs that people have never seen, and it's my responsibility whether or not to ever release them, and that's Fred Hampton's second autopsy. I have color slides of the entire autopsy. And yes, they're gruesome, and I'm not going to say that they are inherently indignant. That is, sometimes it is absolutely necessary for people to see the extent to how somebody was treated to be able to evoke empathy and force some sort of action. But for the sensationalistic aspect, I've never shown them to anybody or never published them, and I probably won't. And if I do, it's going to be his face is going to be obscured, or his genitalia is going to be obscured if it's just a close up of his wounds, just so you can see the extent to which. But anyway, we grapple with this, and unfortunately, for I think both Tim and I, the John Kennedy case has soured us against family consideration. Unfortunately, the Kennedys had too much consideration during the JFK assassination. So I don't feel that same way about Ethel, although I liked Ethel more than I liked Jacqueline. That's not the point. Enough of our sensitivity. The deaths of these two men so fundamentally changed the course of history that trumps anything. Being able to bring that to light, or the people who are responsible to justice, is more important than your sensitivity. If you don't want to look at them, don't look at them. It's that simple.
I agree with you on that.
And I'm sorry that I've said that I want to exhume President Kennedy, but again, it's not for morbid curiosity. If for nothing else, the legal obligation that we owed to him as a murder victim to have a medical legal autopsy performed. Oswald had 2. Kennedy still hasn't had 1. So I still hold out hope that we will be able to exhume him and prove my theory right or wrong about Robert Kennedy taking the autopsy materials. But at the very least, to show him the dignity of having a medical legal autopsy.
Well, I'll quote LBJ here, but I'll say there's no grace like a Kennedy. Um,
At least in
yeah.
the United States.
Yeah. Well, guys, I appreciate the time you gave me to talk on this episode of the podcast. And I'm glad we got to be able to do a group discussion and put it in the books. I look forward to the next one that we do. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Would you guys like to rattle off where they can find your links? And I'll make sure they're in the episode links below. Tim, if you'd like to go first, and Craig will.
The only link I have would be, I guess, at Amazon or maybe eBay for my book. That's be
How
about
about your home address?
it.
You got a phone number?
Oh, no.
I would like to call you when I'm drunk reading JFK documents.
There you go. There you go. The only link that I have at this point is Craig Ciccone, I think, .blog. So you can read more about my JFK project, the Witness Project. You can order it from there. And the upcoming RFK, because I want to do the same thing. Tim and I are working on doing a book and a map of the Robert Kennedy eyewitnesses as well.
And if you're listening to me now, giving my links, well, you've already found me here, but we're available everywhere. And also, I'll make sure I link all the clips that I have mentioned in this episode in the bottom in the comments to make sure you guys can be able to see what we were talking about for things that we couldn't have shared on screen because it's already limited with 3. But thank you for listening to this episode of Out of the Blanket. Stay tuned for our next episode.